On today's episode, we're going to nerd out on one of the least talked about, but most important financial topics for agency owners, working capital. Most agency founders focus on revenue growth, profit margins, and utilization. But the thing that often determines whether your agency feels financially strong or constantly stressed is working capital.
All right, Siwuk. So, working capital. Let's first set the stage. What is working capital? And especially for an agency, what does working capital mean?
To put it simply, the working capital is the timing gap between when you pay your team and when your clients pay you. So if you kind of boil that down, some of the biggest drivers for an agency is, your payroll or your team costs, accounts receivable. So, how quickly or how much clients owe you. And then the concept of deferred revenue, how much work you need to deliver into the future. But oftentimes this translates really to the amount of cash a business needs to keep on hand.
Just so for folks who are still trying to grasp this concept, like why is there a gap at all?
Yeah. So in a typical agency, employees are paid every 2 weeks. Contractors may be slightly different, but generally speaking, every 2 weeks. But then clients, you might agree to payment terms net 30, net 60, in some cases net 90. So you may be paid, well later, months, it could be months later from when you incur that expense.
And, I think when it comes to working capital, this comes up a lot in our acquisition conversations because, as we're in the process of, acquiring an agency and it gets to kind of the conversation around working capital, we actually get to see, first of all, the variation. Some agencies, have really high working capital needs and some have very low working capital needs. So maybe you could explain, what does that mean for folks?
Yeah. So high working capital needs usually correlates to long client payment terms where you have to keep incurring expenses before actually getting paid. So let's say all your clients pay you in net 90, so in 3 months, but you're, still paying your team, every 2 weeks. You're essentially have to have enough cash on hand to cover all of your expenses for 3 months before actually getting paid by a client. So that timing difference is what really creates that pressure on an agency.
And there are cases we come across agencies that have very low working capital needs. So, what are the characteristics of such agencies?
Yeah. So, in some agencies, you're paid up front. So you bill before the work happens, and the clients, could be paying upfront as well. So you're always have you have cash on hand to pay your team at all times. So that's that concept is called negative working capital, but basically a very low need to keep cash on hand.
All right. So just so we get it clear, negative, if you have high working capital needs, that is bad. But then if you have negative working capital needs, that is essentially good.
Yeah. Confusing, but that's right.
All right. So how does this tie to, balance sheet? So I think, one of the things, there's the P&L, which I think a lot of agency, founders or owners are kind of, really looking at to manage a business, how much revenue comes in, the expenses, and then the profit at the end of the day. But working capital, a lot of that has to do with balance sheet. Maybe we could just explain, what does that mean and why is that important?
Yeah. So I think, you could look at two agencies that have, identical P&L. So identical revenue, identical profit, but it could be very different from a balance sheet perspective. So one may have, let's call it 300,000 just sitting in cash in the business. Another agency might have 300,000 that's owed to them in their receivables. So very different kind of stability when you have cash on hand versus your cash owed to you. And then you have the liability of having to pay your team on an ongoing basis. So same. But from a P&L standpoint, they look identical. So
right.
The balance sheet is something you got to look closely at.
Yeah. And this is something we also look at during, just diligencing agencies for acquisitions, right? We will they might have an amazing trailing 12-month P&L where it's like, oh wow, profits are super high. But then yeah, you take a look at the balance sheet and it's like, hey, where's all the money? It
Yeah,
could
yeah.
be, and they might have like a really fat accounts receivables, and basically some clients are super late in paying. The payment terms are
Hmm.
terrible. So I think this is always why we look at balance sheets just as much as the P&L.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Let's talk about like billing structure then. Like maybe like how do you, yeah, like in this case of the agency A, which has 300K in cash, and then agency B, which has 300K in receivables. I mean, part of that is the billing structure, and we talked about payment terms and stuff. But yeah, let's talk about like why this matters so much for agencies.
So one of the biggest levers for working capital is this, idea of like when you invoice clients and when they pay you. So if you think about a typical agency, you do the work during a month, you invoice at the end of the month, and you get paid 30 days later. I would say that's a pretty typical way of looking at it. So if you think about you in actual terms, like you work in January, you invoice at the end of January, you may not get the cash until March at that point. So there's like a huge gap between when the work happens and then when you get paid for it. So on the flip side, if you think about agencies who bill at the start of the month and in some cases paid upon receipt, then you have all the cash up front. So let's say you invoice January 1st for all the work to happen in January and you get paid January 1st, or even net 15 or some uh, yeah small
Shorter
amount or
shorter
pretty
window.
quickly short amount. Yep. Then you're sitting on the cash before the expenses go out. So essentially, it's like the idea of, are you financing the client's work, or is the client financing your operations? Right? Who's actually holding the liability there?
Yeah. And definitely like, across our agencies, we've seen, some variations of this where, yeah, some of our agencies, might, um, yeah, just have different billing structures. And, those that have been able to collect payments upfront typically tend to have, a much, stronger cash positions. So actually, I think one of the things that we should talk about is a common scenario that happens a lot with agencies, especially as they move upstream. So, you know, you might, as an agency, a typical kind of growth journey is, you work with smaller clients, you work with startups, and, of course, there's risks with those in terms of them being able to pay at all, like,
Yeah.
and paying late. But generally, there's less red tape in the sense that, you tell them, hey, it's upfront or net 15, they're going to be okay with that. But as you move upstream and you start dealing with more enterprise clients and, especially ones with pretty, structured procurement processes, you start to get, net 45, net 60, and even as bad as net 90. I've heard net 120, which is like bonkers. But,
Yeah.
when we think about that, it just, the implications for an agency moving upstream could be pretty drastic, right? And these are bigger amounts as well. So maybe you could just kind of illustrate, like, what is that? Yeah, what could that mean for an agency, and why it's so, why it's so kind of perilous for them to, be in this situation.
Yeah. If you think about, let's say you have an enterprise client that pays you like 150,000 a month, and you have net 90 payment terms, which is very common. You could, go for, 3 months and have what, 450K sitting in receivables that, you've incurred all the expense, you've paid your team every 2 weeks, and you haven't seen, a dollar from that client. That's like a clear example of an example where agencies need to have a large cash reserve to get them through that period of time, or in some cases, a line of credit that they can tap um, to get them through that period of time.
Yeah. So like, even if, so they've accumulated all these like 450K of receivables, and even if they're
Yep.
doing at like 50% margin, and that's still like 200
Yep.
thousand plus that they've incurred in expenses before they even see a dollar. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it's a double edged sword. Like, as you kind of move upstream, you're like, oh, great. Once I have big clients with deep pockets, everything's going to be great. But there are these things to navigate. And speaking of navigating it, there are some ways to mitigate this. And I think, we've had some experience. Maybe you could share kind of how yeah how we navigated
Yeah.
clients with like onerous payment terms.
It really depends on your relationship with the client and that particular procurement team. But oftentimes these larger companies are budgeting, annually. They're really setting aside the funds. So you could, potentially accommodate a unique request where you say, hey, let's invoice upfront for the next 3 to 6 months, maybe even a year of invoices, knowing that the payment cycles are going to be really long. And in some cases, you can get more cash upfront to try to get ahead of this curve where you're always, delayed by 90 days. It doesn't work in all cases, but we've had that go successfully in a few scenarios, and that helped really smooth the working capital needs.
It goes to show like you can develop really good relationships with the procurement team, and they can actually help you navigate this as well. So I think it's always important to make friends.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about like the method through which payment is collected, because this too can impact timing, and the
Yeah.
way you set this up could give you an advantage or disadvantage.
Yeah. So I think in most cases, agencies, issue an invoice and they rely on clients sending a check, right? They might send a ACH payment or some other, if you're using another invoicing platform where they can pay directly, but it's always like a client initiated payment. So if they're late, they're late. If they don't get to your invoice, if they, for a variety of reasons, checks in the mail, we've heard, and,
Yeah.
and then, payments come in late. Like you have very little control at that point.
Yeah. Sorry, I was on vacation. Sorry, I was sick. Sorry,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our CFO is out of the office and I need their approval. So,
Fair enough.
you could have a lot just sitting there in receivables. Um, but in other situations in agencies, we've seen, systems like you have an ACH pool where you keep their bank account information stored in your systems so that you can actually auto charge them at the intervals, or credit card auto pay works well too. So you initiate the payment from them. And, we've seen even a scenario where agencies offer a discount to do one of these methods. So it's like, all right, here, we'll give you a 1% discount if we can do an ACH. So clients might be incentivized to use that as a way to kind of discount the services. But for the agency's perspective, like, yeah, if you have that predictability, if you know that you can get paid faster, like it's a small amount to pay for that service.
Yeah, which is interesting because I think if you're used to like maybe not having to deal with some working capital challenges, you might be like, oh no way, I'm not going to give up on 3%. That's quite a bit. Um,
Yeah.
but then I think once you taste the, some of these, like you have some close calls where, oh my goodness, like you barely made payroll because the check came super late. Like 3% might actually feel like a small
Yeah.
price to pay for that certainty. So I think it really depends, and I think every agency is going to have their own take on whether it's worth it or not.
Yeah. And the other thing is, depending on your specific agency and the number of clients and invoices you deal with, if you're in the hundreds of invoices a month, um, it becomes onerous to chase down specific payments. The time that it takes your finance team or whoever is doing that, your account managers to actually get the payments, that's easily more than 3% of what somebody's
100%.
paying you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So okay, we talked about kind of the payment methods. Let's talk about like how you know, agencies should think about from an accounting perspective, and understanding the numbers, because we're talking about movements of cash, right, with working
Hmm.
capital, but
Yep.
it's important, to kind of look at the accounting in a certain way. So maybe we could dive into what we're talking about there.
So I think really this is how agency owners can look at profitability in a accurate lens. Um, so there's accrual accounting and cash accounting. So in cash accounting, you're really recognizing the revenue as you receive the cash. So let's say that client pays you a year in advance. It could look like, wow, like we had a really good month, and it really can make the business look a lot more profitable than it actually is. Um, but you still need to deliver on the work. So then, the next month could be really unprofitable because you're incurring all the costs but not getting the revenue. So it really kind of distorts your view of your finances. But then under, accrual accounting, that payment would show up as deferred revenue on your balance sheet, and you're only recognizing that revenue as the work is being delivered. So that year deposit that the client made, you'll separate it over the next 12 months. It really smooths out what that looks like.
Yeah. So actually, just to make sure we could like tie this together. So from a when we think about cash accounting, it's basically like it could go two ways, right? I mean, and one way is what you talked about. You get prepaid for a lot of work, and then you kind of end up being like, all right, we're so profitable, this month because all this money came in, right?
Yeah,
Um, on the flip side, you know, y- you could have signed a lot of projects, you're doing a lot of work, but then the payment hasn't come in yet, and then you might be like,
yeah,
oh my god, we were
that's true.
so not profitable, and so you have a distorted view, even though like you did if in accrual accounting you would have had a very profitable month if all that
Yep,
lined up, like the revenue you recognize it, and you've signed the contract, and it's just a matter of collecting on it. So
yep,
there's those kind of two sides to it. Now with the danger here is, like, I think you can have a very false sense of your financial situation and make poor decisions with what you do with that cash, right? So maybe we could talk about
yeah.
like, what are some ways that this could go all wrong?
Yeah, I think if you think about an agency who distributes some kind of profit share or like bonuses or something that's based on performance. So let's say you do that on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, every 6 months, and you're basing your calculations on how much to distribute on your cash based financials. You
Oof.
could end up distributing way more money than you should. And you'll really leave your agency cash strapped and have like that shortfall in working capital. So I think cash is a dangerous cash based accounting is a dangerous place to be.
Oh my goodness. I'm just
Yeah.
thinking loud.
Yeah.
So like, okay, so Q1, like client prepays for like 9 months of work or whatever, so you have this huge balance, and then you're like, all right, time for Q1 distributions. Oh my god, we were so
Yeah.
profitable, and so you pay out a big chunk of that to yourself, and then
Yep.
all of a sudden you still got to do 6 months more of work, and that's where things can get, I mean, hopefully very few people do that who are listening in, but that's
Yeah.
that's quite scary. So accrual helps you get a much more accurate picture.
Yeah, but even with accrual, just kind of thinking through that, you could also be in a cash situation where, from an accrual standpoint, you could have recognized revenue, but again, the client could have not paid you.
Yeah.
So from a accrual standpoint, it could have looked like, oh, we're profitable and we have money to distribute, but hey, clients are late. In cases, you could be late for a month, 2 months, and you have to definitely take a look at how much is on your accounts receivables before making those distributions.
Right. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, that's a situation that we've come across a few times ourselves where, it's like, hey, we had a very profitable quarter, time to make the distributions, but it's like, oh, this
yeah.
client is
Where's the
late.
money?
Yeah, where's the money? So yeah, so so how would you advise agencies? Because it's not, you're not getting the, like, you just have to be, pretty smart about, looking at the bigger picture and like kind of looking at multiple sources, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's structural, right? As much as you can receive money before the work is being done, and really mind, how quickly you're being paid by the clients, making sure you're minding the accounts receivables, and then being realistic. If clients aren't going to pay, then quickly writing that off and having a realistic picture of your financials.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more in terms of like concrete examples. So we have a couple scenarios to talk about.
Yep.
Yeah. Why
Mhm.
don't you take the first one?
Okay, so this scenario is we'll call the prepaid service trap. So this is for agencies that sell a large bundle of work that's prepaid. So some examples of that. Let's say you sell a bundle of hours. So it's like, all right, we're going to sell you 100 hours and you can use it, whenever. Or it could be more deliverable based, not time based. So it's like, all right, we'll sell you, 100 blog posts or 10 videos, but, we'll deliver it at a later time, but you buy it up front. And in many cases, these are like open-ended work arrangements. So it's like, all right, well, whenever you need to use it, you'll use it, but you've paid us for it. So in the same scenario, the agency collects a lot of cash, and but all of that is an obligation that you need to deliver on. So yeah, it ends up being a flag, right? Like when we look at agencies like this, when we are potentially acquiring an agency, if we see that there's a ton of obligations that need to be delivered on, we don't know when it's going to happen. Like that's like an immediate, red flag for us.
So would this count under deferred revenue then?
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And like the way around this obviously is, the you can't have open-ended timelines. And I
Hmm.
think this is like, a hard earned lesson or learned lesson for a lot of folks where, yeah, you kind of have to operate with with some kind of a cap. So I know for some of our agencies, we might sell, 25-hour, 100-hour packs for, web development. But it's like, hey, to be used within, 1 quarter. Like, so there's a 3-month expiration to it.
Yeah.
And that way, there's some resource planning that could be done. And, one of the scariest things is, yeah, you have, thousands and thousands of hours of work that you haven't delivered on and you don't know when they're coming. I think that's
Yeah.
when it gets a bit dicey for your agency.
Yeah, that's when all of those credits come due, and everyone's asking for to use their credits at the same time. Then suddenly, like the agency has to deliver a ton of work. So even from a team perspective, you may need to bring on more team members or more contractors on a very specific time period to deliver on those contracts that you pre-sold.
Yeah. So I mean, if it's just illustrated in a clearest way, it's like you get paid a bunch of money and you're like, hey, we're good, we're like financially strong, and then your team is like coasting with low utilization because they're like, oh yeah, like we don't like there's not much demand, or like the clients aren't needing us to do a lot of this stuff right now. But then all of a sudden, at some point, that could pick up and it could exceed the capacity that you have, so that it forces you to spend extra dollars to bring on excess capacity, which of course kills the margins. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
that's that's a crappy place to be, but giving me some flashbacks there.
Yeah.
Okay. The other scenario that we have come across is something that we call the agency Ponzi scheme. And this is related to kind of uh, the deferred revenue challenge, but a lot of this actually starts. It's almost like a downward spiral because the agency is unable to do the work profitably. And so I think one way that agencies fall into a trap is, oh, like, they're doing a web project. It gets, just extended. The timelines go way beyond its maybe it's a fixed fee. And then all of a sudden they still need to pay their employees, but they're unable to they've run out of money. And so they have to find a way to fund that by selling in another project to a different client, collecting a big chunk of it upfront, using that to kind of pay the expenses for this other project. And then now all you've done is kick the can down the road where you just have to keep you know you just have to keep you know paying or selling in new projects to keep the music going. And so, as you can see, like the moment you can't find a new client to fund your current operations, the music kind of stops. And so this is like literally a Ponzi scheme situation. And yeah, this is, yeah, I mean, like it's super, and I don't think it's anything about fraud, but there's like, it's like a fragility aspect to it. Like you're basically operating your agency on a knife's edge because like the moment you can't bring on that new client to pay for what you're doing now, everything falls apart.
Yeah. And if you don't have a handle on your financials, looking at it on a accrual basis, and it may seem from a cash position, things could be okay.
Yeah.
The cash comes in, you're paying your team, you get another deposit, and the cash looks good. So from a working capital standpoint, you've kind of solved that immediate challenge. But you're literally not looking at the deferred revenue and the liabilities of what you need to deliver into the future.
Yeah, bonkers.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about like we've talked about all these nightmare scenarios, but for an agency, what does a healthy working capital model look like?
So the first is billing monthly in advance. So regular cadence and bill before the work is being done. Um, Clients being on some kind of automatic payment, so ACH or credit cards. Um, if you do have some of these enterprise clients that pay longer, 60 to 90 days, really being manageable and not, if it is, a big portion of your client base, just being realistic and manage the cash that will come. Really managing the accounts receivables, so making sure that you don't have any aging receivables over 30, definitely not 60 and 90 days late. So really make sure clients are paying on time and having the discipline internally to keep on checking in on a weekly basis
Yeah,
on that.
or stopping
And
work
then
if clients continue to be late, right?
yeah, stopping work and just making sure, because that's another dangerous spot. If you continue to keep working and then the client defaults on all your payments for 6 months, and that's a
Okay.
tough spot to be in. And then the last thing, yeah, all the prepaid work. If you get big deposits, be really disciplined with how you handle that cash and don't distribute it all.
Yeah. And then, what's the impact on the balance sheet then for a healthy agency?
So you should have strong cash reserves in the business. Your inflows should be very predictable, and then your delivery on your work should be very manageable. So there's no kind of lumpiness
So, and then
to
the liability
the
wise, right? The
expectations.
the the obligations, the deferred revenue part on the balance sheet is much smaller, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, awesome. All right, so going back to like two agencies, right? Same revenue, same margins, but you can still have drastically different situations financially. And so this is what working capital is really all about: is hey, how can you ultimately turn the revenue into usable cash? Because at the end of the day, the businesses live and die by how much cash they have. And so if you take away anything, think about that. Just think about converting your revenue into cash, and that's what the idea of working capital is all about. And you want to shrink that to as little as possible. So yeah, with that, thank you for joining us, and until next time, have a good one.
Thanks.